audience is doing test. We're especially interested in how our audience is doing test management right now. Um, anyway, I could just while you're answering the poll, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jason English, a principal analyst at Intellex. We're a boutique analyst firm covering digital transformation broadly, but also with a strong specialization in cloud native development, DevOps, and test and development processes. So I have some background in dev test, having led marketing and some product design for software testing vendors in the past. I even got to co-author the first book on service virtualization back in the day, almost it is 10 years ago now, back in 2012. And I've certainly enjoyed covering this space a lot. Today, I'm joined by Joel Montalvisky of Practitest. Joel, if you're on, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Okay, I was actually trying to keep quiet, but I'll go ahead. So, hi, Joel. I'm one of the co-founders and chief solution architect of Practice. I'm also in the world of testing for more than I want to. I guess say I to give some ideas. I started testing back when Y2K bug was actually in style. And my working practice is mostly working in addition to basically leading the product, working with all of our customers to make sure that they're working with system correctly. So I have a pretty cool job where I basically talk to testers every single day to understand how they're working and how can we make a better system for them.
Excellent. Well, no, I'm wondering if we have some test results in, or if we're if
We
people are
actually
answering.
have some very nice respondent rate. I'm going to give one more second, still rising up. So we'll give, I think, 15 more seconds for the less people to participate. But we have a lot of responses here, absolutely. Okay, so the question that we asked was about how are you currently managing your tests? And obviously, we acknowledge that there are multiple answers to this question. There's more than one way that a company utilize to manage testing. The top answer, which let's see if it's surprising, the number one answer still is spreadsheets, which is Excel and GSIT and the likes. Followed by an equal amount of respondents who responded they're sharing their tasks using either folder or shared drives. Now it just changed. People keep continuing responding, or via repositories such as such as GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and so forth. We also have many people who manage their testing using support tickets and service management, such as Jira, ServiceNow, and the likes. Some proportions, smaller rate, in declining rate. We also have some still usage in utilizations of ALM and Agile project management tools and legacy test managements, such as Rationales and others. And I think, and of course, rising up, that was lower in the list. We have cloud-based test managements like Practitest. It's actually not lower in the rate. I think that would be the second in response rate until now. So this is what we have so far. And without further ado, let's hand over to discuss test management today. Jason, I'm handing to you and closing this poll.
All right. Yeah, that's very interesting. Certainly not a surprise to expect that a lot of people are still doing it the old way, and it almost seems like it never goes away, right? And that's kind of why we're here. So let's talk about test management 3.0. So, yeah, I've covered a little bit of my background. Definitely, I've been in this space for a while, but I was just going to go ahead and So why test management 3.0? If there's one thing that instantly kind of sets off my hype detector, it's someone claiming the technology has reached a new version number. But in the case of test management, it's probably warranted. Test management 1.0 was basically just a place for your scripts. The scripts themselves may have been manual steps or checks that were listed in a spreadsheet, or they'd be unit and functional tests that would be written as files into a CVS or a file system. Um, Project management and ALM tools were just starting to emerge as a system of record. So, that kind of brought us to test management 2.0, which, out of the typical waterfall approach that we had, these two trends started emerging. Cool. Yeah, the two trends started emerging. Um, Agile development, CI/CD pipelines, uh, test and deployment automation all arose out of that, and then the beginnings of service-oriented architectures, and that made software environments much more distributed. And now we're at test management 3.0. That's why we're here. There's three big mega trends that are kind of pushing this movement in the test management space. So automated releases and cloud infrastructure, managed by highly distributed and remote teams, using an incredibly heterogeneous array of tools and platforms. So just like we needed to automate and orchestrate code and components, environments and infrastructure, we need to do the same for test management. However, a good tester may not necessarily be a good developer, and vice versa. So there are still certain skill sets that have to do with how we evolve to this new state. Now, I kind of listed, showed a bunch of this historical information, but basically leading to the current state of products. Practitest has a really good survey out there that I recommend you pick up. It's practitest.com/state of testing. Had a lot of interesting data in there. Definitely, I thought what was most interesting is that most of the testers surveyed said they had been at it for more than 5 years, or 5 to 10 years even, and more than half of those said they would still be doing some form of testing or test training or mentoring in 5 years. So clearly, the people who are in this space have a ton of enthusiasm about it, and a lot of energy around keeping the state of the art in testing going. But what's also interesting is less than half of all of the tests in the companies that responded also said that 88% or less was of the testing was done by non-testers. So basically, most testers touch almost every aspect of the release of software. So if I can advance it. Yeah, so we're going to kind of introduce these three megatrends, and then I'm going to pass it to Joel. We'll have a little discussion about each. Megatrend 1 I call automation everywhere. That's basically that the software supply chain has evolved. In the waterfall days, you might have had 3 environments: test, staging, and production. But now if you have a born on the web company like a Netflix or Airbnb, for instance, they may have as many as 8 to 10 automated builds per release, with releases happening every 15 minutes. Now, the automation isn't just happening due to moving the dev test infrastructure to cloud. It's also a matter of being able to abstract the infrastructure as code using continuous integration tools and the ability to containerize deployments for portability. So the end result of that is that we get back a lot more metrics and telemetry from within all of these containers that are running in these environments. That moves the test surface to a SaaS or cloud-based tooling environment. And that's basically why we're seeing a lot of tools needing to scale vertically as well as horizontally to help cover a lot of the different remote environments that are part of a globally distributed cloud infrastructure. So Joel, how do you think that this megatrend has impacted the management of tests themselves?
I think that one of the things that we're seeing, and I think that you mentioned that, is that we have quite a lot more tools in here, and it's not only about environments. Obviously, we do have quite a lot of environments, and it becomes crazy, especially if you need to work with certification schemes such as SOC 2 or ISO, stuff like that. But we can look at it from another way around as well. I think that there's an explosion on the amount of tools out there. And if you're old enough like we are, then you remember when we used to have, I don't know, Silk and Windrunner
Hmm.
and say thank you if you had something like that. Today we literally have thousands of tools and many extremely cheap or even free tools that are pretty good. So one of the things that we're seeing, and I mentioned talking with customers, 10 years ago, you would have seen a quarter of teams that had some automation. Some of them might have a little bit of automation. Now, I think that 3/4 of the teams will have pretty advanced automation. And that is because you have a lot more tools, you have cheaper tools, and you have better tools. So there's no more excuses. I'm not even talking about the business requirement.
Hmm.
So that explosion of automation everywhere, it's making the lives of testers on the one hand easier because we can do a little bit less manual regression and focus on the interesting test, quote unquote. But the amount of the overhead on the management side became incredible because you have scripts everywhere and you have every single tool working separately. And then you have reports that are scattered over God knows how many systems are there. So basically, it's both a blessing and a curse, and people are needing to adapt very very quickly to that.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's interesting how it's basically we've done a really good job of shifting testing left by moving more of that automation into the very front of each release, right? We roll it right into our infrastructure and roll it right into the continuous release process. But what that does is it makes there's so many test signals coming out of that need to be tracked that it makes it really hard for us to predictively understand what's actually happening uh, to the software when it's released. So we don't have that. We've kind of lost that predictive ability because of so much automation, right?
Yeah, and it's basically I think that it's a challenge for test managers that if you manage that correctly, it will also become a competitive advantage because I was talking to test managers that say because we have all of a sudden visibility and accountability to the unit testing layer, then we can take that into account when we're planning the functional testing layer. So, oh, we know that it's completely covered in unit tests. We might make some more risk assumptions on these or those levels. Whereas the opposite is also correct. Meaning, if we found that your unit test and your API tests are not covering this area, then you might want to focus more on that. So I think that it's a pretty good thing that if you work correctly, you're going to be able to not only utilize but account for all of those different resources that are already there. We were just not taking them into account up to now.
Hmm, very good. Well, I think our second mega trend would be just the role of testing in an organization. This has really changed a lot. Now teams they can work from anywhere. We see more and more composite teams that may be regionally or globally distributed, and this really changes the game for access and permissions to use test and delivery suites. So this IM tooling has to go hand in hand with the provisioning and management of tests themselves, right? So and deployment suites. So just to make sure we don't have conflicts over environments or we're not opening up vulnerabilities due to unauthorized access or even just accidental mistakes that happen when people are competing over things like test data or deployment environments. Now, often this kind of shared responsibility will roll up to what we call a platform team as opposed to the traditional IT ops team. There'll be a platform team whose overall responsibility is for this set of tooling that's the kind of kit that's provided to dev test teams. Um, and so that role has changed a lot, as well as just testers themselves. They might not even call themselves software testers anymore. A lot of them are calling themselves, software development engineering and testing, or SDETs, or dev testers, or they're part of a DevSec test team. So, and they're often even part of a pair programming team where they're developing and testing sort of in tandem with another individual. So basically, that kind of changes. It's sort of like an agile focus as well. Well, it changes how testers are categorized. Although it was interesting in your the practice test survey there that most people still identify themselves as being primarily involved in testing, and that's a kind of eye-opening statistic to see among this audience. Now, um, the last bit is this is it's forced us. We talked about how shift left and so much automation has made it really hard to track the testing itself, but it's also caused what we call shift right testing. It's happening a lot more. So what we call progressive testing, um, testing releases, whether that's A/B tests, blue-green tests, canary tests, testing the digital experience of end customers. Um, all of that telemetry also is entering into the picture where we're able to kind of track what developers are, what customers are actually doing with the software in deployment, and so uh, it doesn't mean that we're not still shifting left all the time. It just means that we're taking in information from the other side of the equation as well. So Joel, what would your opinion be on how the roles of testing have changed test management?
Um, I think that here the it has been a very roller coaster kind of evolution. Um, I remember what back when Agile became popular. It's not that it was introduced. Agile was introduced early 2000s with extreme programming and stuff like that, but no one actually took it into account. But
Mm-hmm.
around 2010, 2008, maybe 2011, Agile became mainstream. And I remember, at least in Tel Aviv, where we were working here, I vividly remember sitting on a meeting with a lot of QA managers saying, are we out of job? And the reason that people were asking that was because literally organizations were firing up all their testers. All of a sudden, one of the agile principles was that everyone should be in charge of quality. So if developers are in charge of quality, what is the role of the tester anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And it was very funny because these organizations fired their testers. They released one, two, three crappy releases, and then they rehired the same testers to come and save them from their misery here. And I think that it took a while and it took a couple of revolutions for us to understand that we need testers, but we don't need the same type of testing that we had up to now, because it's true. We have people who will be doing more testing, and we're, because working in an agile team, we're able to coordinate better. And you were mentioning at the beginning on the state of testing that a lot of people are seeing themselves a lot as testing coaches, for example, because
Yep.
we need to explain to our developer peers how can they test by themselves. And they're becoming testing architects because they get into the user story discussion and start saying, oh, maybe we need to think about this, or maybe we need to think about that. And these were discussions that were not part of 15, 20 years ago. So it's the role of testing is shifting, and that's a pretty cool thing if you ask me. Now, you were mentioning the shift right, and here I think that we're on the messianic stage because we're talking about stuff that will happen, but it's not happening enough. Meaning the shift left is there, and we see it all the time. Shift right is more about what we know needs to happen, because it only makes sense that if we're able to understand what's going on in production, we will take that data into our process and we will close the loop and say, hey, you know what? This MVP that we were just releasing, this minimal viable product, it's okay. Let's continue on this area, or what we're doing in practice all the time. And it's something we have been doing for ages. If you find a bug in production, then go ahead and fix it very quickly. But that testing in production means that you need to modify your approach. You need to catch that bug, understand it, and resolve it fast. So not all organizations are there, but we are getting there. So I think that it's going to be modifying the role of testing. And I think that we're getting to understand that, you know, when you're teaching your kids how to ride a bike, and one of the cool things about training wheels is not only that they're more stable, by being more stable, they're actually running slower, because those training wheels
Yep.
just make the bike go slower. So we need to understand that traditional testing is like a training wheel in that sense. We're going to give you that warm, fuzzy feeling. We're going to help you to release, but we're also going to be stopping you from releasing fast. So if we want to start releasing faster, we need to do a mental switch. And by we, I mean us testers, and understand that our job is not to test everything. Our job is to help to do that risk analysis. What do we need to test before production? What do we need to test after production? Because we can find those bugs and fix them there. So it's kind of an alignment with the business reality. So the role of testing is definitely shifting. We have done, let's say, about a third of the shift. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
the interesting shift is going to be once we actually complete it and we close that double helix loophole for the DevOps, and we start bringing back that information and become more of risk analysts than just testers.
Yeah, that really is the holy grail of all of this when you're continually releasing into production, um, to get a better understanding of how that feeds back into each, successive release. Um, and that does kind of bring up our third mega trend here, which is measuring success. I kind of put uh, I know some developers who do this a lot of times where they find themselves having to make up fake unit tests, embed test scripts into the code itself in order just to fulfill the needs of some structural bug checking tools that are out there. Um, we all know that just because you could generate 100,000 or a million types of unit or you know procedural tests doesn't mean it's generating any value at all. In fact, that's kind of the big game as far as making sure that testing is continuing to be perceived as something that adds value, right? It's not just something you can kind of throw at the wall. If you're eating up cycles, whether that's just compute and storage costs due to the exhaust of all of that testing, or just all the labor that goes into continually managing tests. So if we're creating test suites that we have to constantly go back and fix every time there's a problem, that's a problem in and of itself. It makes it much harder for us to test the software itself if we're constantly um, having to test or fix tests, right? In fact, it's basically putting the whole cart before the horse. So um, what progressive teams are doing is they're really changing how they measure the value they get out of testing. So they might have had SLAs for, say, this is going to maintain 99.9% quality or something into the future. But those kinds of measures, they may be unrealistic, and they actually may not align with the business goals of the company to have a particular have particular hard metrics, as opposed to just saying, hey, we want to continually improve. We want our software to get better over time. We want to achieve objectives of meeting the needs of most customers, and that's really where we see a reorientation from these kind of penalty-based SLA type approaches to measuring the performance of the software delivery function to SLIs, the indicators of performance and performance improvement, and SLOs, which are objectives for improving the quality and performance of software over time. So a lot of that has to do with also managing these suites of tests so that they're aligned with the real risks that are happening out there in the environment. So for each new release that I introduce, I can have a certain kind of risk score that I'm willing to accept, a certain level of an error budget, as well as an idea about what's the perceived value of improving this customer experience, and that can be assigned to the testing itself, so that the testing is perceived as part of the value of delivering the software, not as something that's holding it back, right? It's the enabler of the value that's delivered in front of customers. And that even ties to a lot of systems where they're basically measuring the financial outlay on whether that's for labor or infrastructure costs, or other related software costs that assign to that customer's value. So I know that Practitest has been doing some work in this space, and it really is a big part of getting to this test management 3.0. What's your opinion of that, Joel?
I was muted, and sorry, I was muted basically because I just got out of COVID. The reason we did it, yeah. So I'm still coughing, so I have a big glass of water here, but I don't apologize for it. In addition to talking about what Practice is doing, I think that you hit the nail on the head, where we need to stop being a sunk cost. Meaning, up to now, people have been paying testers because they have to do it. And why do they have to do it? Because we don't want to release any bugs, and it's basically you're bringing a bazooka where what you could have brought is just something to kill a couple of flies, but On the other hand, you were not willing to take the risk. Okay, so now we need to start aligning. Now we need to start fine tuning. And I think that if we go back to the modification of the way the testers need to see themselves, then we need to start seeing ourselves, even if we're not developing code, we're not generating direct value, we should be enabling value. And I like the way that you're saying, meaning there's a concept that I have been talking about for the last year and a half, and I call it user story value hypothesis. Okay, and basically it means that if you're going to be developing a user story, I'm going to be right now doing feature X. I don't care. I'm going to take in this button instead of being red, it's going to be green. I have to have a hypothesis of why am I doing that. The hypothesis, again, it's not me, it's going to be product. And product may say, I'm assuming that if I turn it from red to green, it's going to increase our click rate by, I don't know, 7%. We need to start talking that language. Not only do we need to do that, but part of that user story has to be, how do I add instrumentation and baselining so that once I release that, I can validate that hypothesis. And if when we validate that hypothesis, we realize that by turning it from red to green, oh, we increased it by 6%, maybe, okay, we can fine tune a little bit. If we increased it by 18%, yippee-ki-yay, we were great. But on the other hand, if we decreased it by 3%, then we know that we're not on the right path. And that MVP, it's great that we're able to say, no, 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 turn it back to red because red was the way that it should have been. But if we don't measure it, and our role in here is basically to become that radar, to become those X-rays that once you have something in place, you are going to be able to say, hey, yes, it's working, and no, it isn't working. So even if we're not generating that value, we're not turning the button from red to green, we're going to be able to help the organization to validate that, because quality, it's not only lack of defects. Quality is if we're going to be getting to the appropriate result. So I think that even before we start talking about AI, and I'm pretty excited to talk about AI in practice test, I think that we need to talk about measuring the right stuff and providing value by measuring that stuff, because someone has to measure it. And I don't think that you cannot start measuring once the system goes into production. I remember releasing features some years ago, and we said, hey, are they right? And we were not able to know how many people were working on that. And then we started measuring how many people are working with that. And we said, wait, but is it more people or less people than before? And because we didn't think beforehand, we didn't have that benchmark, then we were just dead in the water. We didn't know if we had increased the value in the eyes of users or not. So again, this is the deeper thought that has to go into quality professionals. And I'm calling ourselves quality professionals because we're not testers anymore. We're doing way more than that. Okay. Now, in the sense of value for testing, I think that a lot of us commit mistakes, especially around automation. There is this weird idea that if you have more automation, it's better. And the more tests you have, it's better. And you know what? In a sense, it might be at the beginning. If you had 7 test cases because you just got started with any tool that you had, and you were able to double the test cases that you had to 14, I'm going to guess again, off the top of my head, that you didn't double your coverage, but you increase your coverage. And you want to have bigger coverage in some place. But there's this point where the more tests you add, not only are you not adding more coverage, but you're adding fragility, because the moment that you have more stuff that is running, some stuff will fail, meaning we will have those false negatives where you have some tests that start failing, and then you need to go ahead and evaluate where are they failing, or it's going to take, instead of taking 5 minutes, and so you could run it on every single build, it's taking right now 25 minutes, and so you don't want to wait 25 minutes for the build to be okay or not. So it starts becoming a burden. And I think that we need to have more visibility into the value that your testing is doing, especially once you reach a certain threshold. Okay, and this is where we're actually trying to put more work into it, to try to say, hey, it's not only about running more test cases, is to ensure that you're running the correct test cases. And also, if a test is not right, to give you an indication, hey, there are some pointers towards your test not being the right test. I'm not even saying if it's correct or not. So you should want to go ahead and check that out. And I think that we need to provide that visibility. Okay, and that is our responsibility as a test management organization.
Right. And any of these organizations, I mean, at this point, they've probably absorbed all of these different suites of software that have been created over the last, it could be over the last 10, 20 years even, all with their accompanying tests that are being kind of rolled into the current day process. And so even if we don't think, even if we think we're on a totally new infrastructure and architecture and that it's a new application, chances are there's probably a lot of this legacy stuff that exists in the environment too. And that's kind of where you have, if you're going to use automation, maybe use it to survey all of these, all of the components of release that are going on, so that you can find what's significant, where is this effort being expended, and going forward, we can focus our individuals on testing what's changed, what really matters, and then have AI kind of help us figure out how to filter the rest of the testing environment, as well as picking what's significant to look at.
Correct. It's at a certain point, we need to understand that it's not a matter of numbers; it's a matter of quality within those numbers.
Yep.
Okay, so that's where we're trying to focus, and basically to do that not based on any blind faith hard-coded algorithm, because one of the biggest challenges is that every organization is different. Even within the same company, you might have two teams because of different technologies and different approaches and a different history of the team or the product. Then their testing approach and the test cases themselves will be different. Even if you're reusing test cases from one team to the other, for some projects, they will provide more value than from others. And so it's a matter of how can we analyze the actual value that it's doing to your project in your context, and then give you those pointers so that you can basically work on them. And again, we're pretty excited that this is something we started thinking about a year ago, and we're getting some pretty nice results lately.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we have about 20 minutes left, so let's move on to. I'd love to see a demo of how Practitest does this, and better understand the state of the art in test management now.
Okay, let's see if I can start sharing. Oh, come on, let me share, please. There we go. Okay, so one of the things that I think that we need to understand something, and we were saying that a lot of more testing is happening around the system, but it's not all the organizations are able to do it, because as you were saying on the survey that you started before, I think that especially if you're working with automation, it's going to be trivial for your team to say that they're going to be working with GitHub or GitLab, or I don't know if you're old enough with SVN or something like that. But usually people working with automation have some sign of itch or allergy working with the ALM that it's in the system. It might be practice, it might be something else. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to include into the system in order to provide those measurements, in order to provide that visibility into your automation. We're trying to eliminate all the barriers of entry. One of the things that we're seeing quite a lot is that the automation team development, there is a mental barrier of entry. I don't want to report my results over to your test management system because test management systems are for manual testing. Okay, and this is a misconception. I mean, it's been years since test management systems started doing way more than that. So in case you haven't seen it, I'm showing right now Practitest in front of you. Practice is the system that we have been talking about. We are a test management solution, an ALM solution, that we have modules obviously for requirements management, and we integrate with Jira and stuff like that. We have modules for issue tracking, and again, we can manage your bugs, but also integrate with other systems. Remembering that shifting left means that we're bringing all the information from user stories, and shifting right means also that we're going to be capturing that feedback from the bugs captured. But when we look into our testing functionality, we're going to be working within two main modules in the system. One of them being test library that we're seeing here. This is my test repository. And again, you're going to be managing manual test cases, but also automation test cases in here. Why? Because all the execution of these manual and automated test cases are going to be managed within what we call test sets. Okay, and a test set is going to be a group of test cases that you're running together. Usually, let's say that you have your IK build or something like that, you can put it here, or your CI is going to be reporting in here. The question then becomes, how are we able to capture all that information? And for us, the answer has been a number of years in the making. And I think that our biggest breakthrough was, again, when we create a new test, and obviously it can be a manual scripter or exploratory, but when we're looking for automation testing, because we were able to work and approach different teams on different continents and different levels of maturity, we understand that we needed to provide multiple ways for the different teams to input back the results of the automation into Practitest, okay? And so what we're doing all the time, we're adding more and more ways for those teams to upload the results of their automation or to populate into practice automation. So the level that a lot of people have is the API level, not meaning that you're going to be testing API. We're not using World Framework or stuff like that. Basically, it means that practice has a very developed REST API, just to give you a glimpse into it, where you can communicate with practice using a REST API and just either report runs into the system or generate test cases into the system, stuff like that. This is usually very, very standard. And I'm not going to say that every tool has an API, a REST API that you can use in order to upload the test results into the system, but a lot of them have. Now, the problem with this is that this is a very code-heavy solution. I need to go into each one of my scripts, and I need to add a snippet of code at the end of the test to say, hey, translate the results into steps connecting to your test management system, in this case, practice, and populate that information. It's great. It gives you a lot of flexibility. You can do whatever you want with the system, but it requires a lot of work from your infrastructure. Okay, and so if you have a cool infra team, they might be able to do it. But
do you find that they do that at a global level? In a sense, basically, like someone might do this with all of their tests and then just sort it out later in practice test, or what do you see out there?
I think that it goes deeper than that. I think that it happens on a gradual base. At the beginning, they just start like sending the information to practice just a post request. And so it's very hard coded. Let's say on my CI system, I have a job. At the end of the job, I will go and on a very, very hard coded basis, just to give you an example, that's a great question, by the way. And I will go and say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to give a little bit of any room for changes. And so just go ahead and report the results blindly in here. But I think that as the team becomes more mature, they want to make a better impression. And we've seen teams that they just go and they say, hey, you know what? I don't even know if my test cases are already there because they have an independent automation team. So what happens is that as the CI is running at the end of each run, then using the API, the test system might come and say, hey, you know what? Let's first of all see if the test that I just run exists in the system using the get test in the project. If not, then we're going to go ahead and create it using another API. Once you create it, then you go into an existing test set and you add the test set into that. So you basically link practices into your automation framework so that you can just report the stuff over there. And that's also the beauty of the API, the REST API. You leave the architecture to the infra team, okay? But as it surely sounds, it's a lot of work. It gives you a lot of value, but there's quite a lot of work that you need to put in here. And you know what? Because it takes so much work in order to get that value, then if you're not willing to do that, if you don't have a dedicated infra team doing it, then you might not get to do all of this. And this is where the additional ways of working with practice come into play. Okay, and so for example, one of the ones that we had, it's let's say a low code. Let's start with the no code solution, and this one was great. Something that we call the firecracker. Now, the firecracker, it's a methodology or a system within practice that basically you just throw to practice an XML report with all the results of your test cases. And practice goes and translate that into test cases, into runs, and just generates the results. And when does it work? Well, it actually came from developers. We had a company that said, hey, we want to use the API in order to parse over the results of an XML file because they were running JUnit test cases. And we just want to bring all that information into the system because JUnit tests are tests and we want to have them in there. And when talking to developers, they were willing to give us the XML and to send it to us, but nothing over that. So we basically just took our APIs and generated a system that helps you to do that. By the way, it's so cool that we even made that an open source project. Let's see if I can actually find it here quickly. Okay, I can send it to you later on, but there's an open source project built with an API that you can do it that, and it's called the Firecracker, and it's a great solution for usually unit tests, but other test cases you can actually go ahead and work with that. Now, the last solution that we had, and this came from another customer who said that all their test cases, all their automation were being run, I think it was in Jenkins or Circle, I don't remember which one of those. And he said that he had a challenge because he needed to work with their IT team whenever they wanted to do a change to the test cases they were running, or if he just wanted to run a suite of test cases very quickly, he didn't know how to reach out to those systems, and he wanted us to help him to run that. And that is where we came up with another solution, something that we call the Xbox, where practices can actually execute your test case and report the runs back into that. And actually, it's pretty cool. I have here an example of that. Basically, the only thing that you need to do, you need to make sure that your test cases can be executed from command line. Okay, and if you do that, then you will install a very small agent. I can have it here installed on my machine, a very small agent that is constantly connected to practice in your automation machine. And then what you do, you can just tell practice, as I have here a set with a couple of test cases. I can tell, hey, you know what? I want you to run, I don't know, scheduled every day at midnight, or only once at this date, or weekly at whatever time I want to, or just go ahead and run your test cases now. And what practice is doing is connecting over to the Xbot, and it's executing the test case. Actually, this is one of the test cases. We're using WebDriver in order to test practice tests. And so this is going in and checking the system. But the cool thing is that as you're running the testing here, you can see, first of all, that the test is running, but you can also see the instrumentation of what's going on in the machine. Our agent is capturing all the information as your test is currently running, because we want to correlate. We want to be able to give you information. Okay, maybe your test failed. What was happening in the machine? Maybe it got stuck. Maybe it got hung over. So all of that information is going to be happening there. And again, we're capturing all of those results into the system. Now, the cool thing is that, let's say that, again, the test is going to continue running here. But if I want to see, oh, actually, the test finished running. It's in my other screen. When I get the results of my test, I can correlate between the information that was sent by the test and, again, the actual status of the machine as my test was running. And again, this is beauty because it basically decouples from the execution of the test cases from the infrastructure team. And also, it's tool agnostic. We don't really care what you're running as long as you're running something that is executable by CLI. But again, we don't have a lot of time, and I do want to leave a little bit of time for questions. We were talking about how can we get a better idea of, let's go bluntly, meaning which test cases should I be running here? And this is a feature that we called the value score. Okay, let's come in here. I think that I have it here right now. So as you can see here, this is a new feature that we added to practice about 6 months ago, 9 months ago, and it's pretty cool. Now, every single testing practice test will give you what we call a value score. A value score is, as it sounds, is a grade from 0 to 100, where the idea is that we want to tell you how much value, comparatively speaking, is each one of your test cases providing into the system. Okay, a test that has a value of 100 provides more value than a test that is providing a value of 46. Now, this doesn't mean that the one from 46 is not giving you any value. We're just giving you like a comparative way of approaching this. Now, the idea here is that this score is being captured and modified every time that you run a test. If you have a test, for example, that is finding bugs all the time and you're fixing the bugs in there and you're constantly modifying it, then we're going to be assuming that it has a higher value score, and so we'll give it a higher value score. On the other hand, if you have a test that it's constantly failing and it has been failing for the last 20 runs, and you're not even looking into this, you're not fixing it anymore, it's not modifying the status, then obviously the value of that test is going to go down. Or if you have a test that you haven't modified for 2-3 years, then that test is going to, the value of that test is going to go down. And the idea, what we want to provide you is a little bit more guidance, especially if you have more and more test cases in your repository. Again, you can see it, you can do that value score for all test cases in your project. Then you're going to be able to start qualifying which are the test cases that are providing you more value, which are the test cases that maybe you should start looking into them and either retiring them or fixing them or solving the issues that you have in that. So it's basically kind of an idea of how can we provide more insights for test managers to make the correct choices on which test cases they should be running. A case that blew my mind, and I was talking with one of our customers in there, he told me that one of the things that they were doing, especially around manual test cases, not so much automation, but let's say that you're working on a CI system and you're working with continuous development and your team is eager for you to release the product, and they're telling you, okay, you have a couple of hours. If you're not able to stop the release in a couple of hours, then we're going to go out. Then you can just, for example, come into a specific area in the system here, and let's go here, for example, and organize your test based on the value that you're giving and start running the ones that are giving the most value, because you know that historically, these are the tests that are more interesting to you. Finding more bugs, you're fixing more bugs out of them. So they're helping people to understand where do they need to focus their efforts. Okay, and again, this is an idea of not only doing it based on some hard-coded parameters, we're studying the way that your project works and using those parameters, how you're working your system. Are you reporting bugs in your projects? Are you working with automation or not? All of those parameters will help you to custom fit the way that the value score is going to be applied into your own projects. Okay, and again, it's a pretty cool feature. The only reason that we're able to do it is because being a SaaS product, we have tens or hundreds of millions of runs in practice from multiple customers all around the world. And that is helping us to get very good insights into which are the test cases that people value more or value less in their project. So we're pretty excited about that. And we're already thinking about additional functionalities around AI and machine learning. Some of them are around flakiness. Can we infer based on the behavior of the test if it's a real failure or if it's the matter of a flaky test, and maybe point a flag and say, hey, these tests are flaky, you may want to look into that. We want to take it deeper. We're working a lot into modeling your applications. And so we might be able, based on the historical results of your runs, to say, hey, this area of your product has bigger tendency for risks than this area of the product, and maybe what type of bugs you should be focusing on. So again, let's take the information that you're already capturing and help you to make better decisions on how to work. Okay, so again, these are ideas of how to make testing more efficient and effective.
So a flaky test is probably something that's looking for certain hard-coded values, things that would be variable in production or to a user experience that are just different from session to session, right? So they don't necessarily show that there's a significant error there. It just shows that if anything changes, the tests are breaking apart, right?
It might be around that, but one of the things that we're seeing is that when a test is flaky, then you start seeing some intermittency that is not related to bugs being reported. Okay, so for example, if you can trace a test that just all of a sudden fails without any modifications happening to the test, without any bugs being reported, and it just goes from pass to fail, pass to fail, pass to fail, then it might be showing some flakiness results. Whereas if you have a test that is failing, and then it continues failing for a number of times, but you also report a bug into that test, then you're saying, oh, it's not a test that failed because of flakiness, it's a test that failed because it found something. Or if you're able to correlate a failure of a test to something being modified. So it's more about looking at those hidden patterns and then inferring out of those how to do that. That's the beauty of it. It's not something that, it's not an algorithm that you can just hard code. It's something that you need to learn from the way that your project is working.
Excellent.
Okay. I don't know. Do we want to go to any questions? Let's see. There's a question here of if you can automate or adjust which test cases are executed based on the value score. And that is an interesting thing, because if you notice what we can do, we work in practice within something that is called filters. Okay, and filters is just a way to organize your data in a more dynamic fashion. And within filters, for example, I can generate filters based on the value score. So here, for example, I created a filter that is bringing only test cases where the value score is less than 50. But there is no reason why I cannot create a test where my value score is going to be higher than 75 or higher than 70, and then use the same API documentation in order to dynamically generate a test set. Where am I here? Sorry. To dynamically generate a test set based on that filter and then execute those test cases. So there are quite a lot of implementations that you can do around value score. I think that the biggest barrier was that data was not available. And I'm not sure that I would go as far as deciding which test cases to run based on the value score, based on the question that was asking here. I might decide not to run a test because it's below a specific value score. Because again, don't think that you have 5 test cases. And so if one test case fails, no biggie. But I was working with a customer, they have on the one test set, they have about 7,500 test cases running. That is a place where if you have test cases that are not generating value, you want to be able to filter them out and only start filtering test cases in once something has been modified based on those test cases, so the value goes up. So I think that it works both ways around that. Okay. No question here. Oh, sorry. You were actually answering.
Yeah, I figured there might be.
Okay.
I figured there might be some capability to automate that. That's interesting. Yep.
Yeah, and again, we're just getting started with what we're doing with the value score here. I try to tell people I'm looking at this feature in the same way that we look at Waze when you're driving from one place to the other. Waze doesn't tell you how you should drive, it doesn't drive itself. It's giving you some advice on which route you should be taking, on how you should be going. I don't know you, but myself, I was driving yesterday with my daughter. I was bringing her from a friend, and I didn't like the way that Waze was taking me. So you have this like routes option. Then I went over to the routes option and I was able to basically navigate myself with that help from Waze. That is what we're looking. Again, we're a little bit far from the place where we're going to be able to supplant the tester or the test manager, the risk manager, however we want to call him. But we do want to give you more tools as a test manager on how can you do your work better. Okay, we're not going to be driving for you, but we're going to giving you some good ideas on what you should be using in order to drive yourself.
Excellent. I have one other
Okay.
question that came in here. So this operates independently of the testing tools themselves. I mean, how many different test tools do your customers have?
Oh God. We were actually running some queries on that. We saw that our average customer had anywhere between 4 and 8 different automation tools. And the reason is simple because you're going to be having a couple of unit test tools, and then you're going to be doing some API tools, and you will be using another one there, and you will be using 2 or 3 tools for the functional test because for some of them are going to be more JavaScript based, some of them might be other based. And if you just go over to mobile testing, then add another 2 or 3 different tools that you're going to be putting there. So it has to be tools agnostic. One of the things that a decision that I think was pretty accurate that we made in practice a long time ago was that we have to be tool agnostic. We don't at this point we're in a place where we don't really care what tool you're using in order to run your test cases because we can basically connect and integrate all of them.
Yeah,
Okay,
and they've
understand.
all, if they survive, they can operate headlessly and be invoked through your process as well as their own. So that
Correct.
makes
And
sense.
and I think that it makes sense because sometimes your testing script will start by bringing up the environment, generating some data, then you will do some testing using one tool, then you will do some testing using another tool, and then you will bring the environment down. So by definition, you're already using multiple infrastructures, multiple tools, frameworks in order to run that complex testing scenario. And we're all doing it. Meaning no one is doing that manually. We're not bringing environments on AWS manually anymore. We're not there.
Hmm.
You know, it takes too much time. So I think it's good to be tool agnostic in that sense.
Makes sense. Well, it looks like we're just about at the top of the hour here. So appreciate all the input here. Let me see if.
Okay, just one last question here. I see
Yep.
from someone on the Q&A. They were asking if the test library within practice can distinguish tests based on different types and levels separately. For sure, I invite you to look into our the way that we work with filters. And again, I'll take a minute. The idea of working with filters and not folders is to do exactly that, because if sometimes I want to see the test case, for example, based on the components that I have, I can create filters that will show me, let's say, all my application server test cases in here. And if I want to see, I'm not, again, these are all custom fields. And if I want to see only the empty definitions, then I can see it here. On the other hand, if I want to see my test cases based on the type of test that I have in here, then I can generate a separate test and say, show me now only my API test cases or only my Xcode test cases. Okay, so the idea of filters while managing especially complex data such as test cases is to allow you to organize your data independently using multiple structures at the same time. Okay, so to Francis that was asking about this, so you can actually do it as well. And again, we're on the top of the hour, so everyone, thank you for joining. Jason,
Yeah.
as always, it was a pleasure, and just happy that we could actually get to talk about that.
Likewise, Joel. Glad we could get on today.
Okay, bye
All
everyone.
right.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye.